You're listening to Engineers, the podcast, where founders and operators share firsthand knowledge on how to build and scale startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kuchikov, and our guest today is Tiffany Sieber, founder of Embedded Recruiting that helps startups scale with full cycle marketing, recruitment, and executive performance coaching. Today, we're discussing how startups can benefit from a high-touch fractional recruiting approach. But before we get into the good stuff, Tiffany, welcome to the show. Where are you joining us from today?
Thank you, Oleg. Great to be here today. Such a pleasure to make the time for you and your audience. I am joining from Los Gatos, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley.
Awesome. I was not sure if you were calling from Los Gatos. I know you're headquartered there, as are we, so kind of funny that we are neighbors here. Well, let's get started. So why don't you tell me and the listeners about your professional journey in tech and how that kind of led to what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to start with what drew me to tech in the first place. As a Silicon Valley native, it's really just part of how I've always lived, right? In the heart of innovation, if you will. And so just, really focused on efficiency is really where I see technology offering sort of the greatest impact and benefit to humanity. The more tools that we can sort of integrate in order to exercise our goals and create our impact, the more we can be in balance between work and play. That's an important piece for me because I also think with business as well as with technology as a function of business and use in our communities, it's really all about how are we showing up in the community too, right? And as somebody who specializes in talent management and looking at how technology has influenced people and affected it and how we are affecting it as well, right? I've been fascinated with sort of how it contributes towards creating a more balanced day-to-day life, as well as just how it inspires people and brings people together and can do things quickly that we never thought really could be possible. And so, when we have a fulfilling and productive day at work, we go home and we are happy, healthy, thriving members of community who build strong families and teams. And so that's really one of the things that drew me to technology and innovation. And plus I'm a voracious learner and there's never enough to learn when it comes to deep tech and innovation and all the magic coming from the many minds of the area.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like someone that grew up in the heart of Silicon Valley and basically just surrounded by not just technology, but technology companies too. And how that, not to lose sight of that because a lot of people don't live here and they still have technology in their lives and it's definitely shaping our day to day and how we work. So I'm curious, what kind of work were you doing when you sort of started your career?
At the heart of every entrepreneur is the salesperson. And so that's really where I developed my initial craft of how to distill product value, benefits, and advantages to solve problems and then communicate to those people that were, looking to meet those needs or those requirements. And so I started my career actually in SaaS, so software as a service, sales, and walked in naive and motivated into a pre-established organization and really sort of turned the marketing and the positioning of the product and its use on its head. And so as I did that, reaching sales goals that were double of what I was expected, it really showed me that I have a really natural knack for just understanding sort of the core value of a particular exchange and offering. And then, of course, just building community, building relationships, and building connection in order to help people understand what their life could look like once this problem was solved, right? And so that was really an incredible foundation, one from an operating perspective, but two, just from a general self-awareness, right? I went into sales as a natural and then just sort of transitioned into marketing. And so I went out as a consultant, just started marketing myself to early stage founders to support, brand identity and creation, content development, and just sort of the integration of sales and marketing practices to really close the loop between those two disciplines. And, just by being a Silicon Valley native, and I absolutely understand why people move here and are willing to pay these astronomical cost of living fees, because I am one of those amazing sort of stories where I just sat down at the right restaurant for a burger and a Coke, and I just happened to sit next to one of the original IBM scientists who was foundational in developing Java. And so we just got to talking and building rapport, and he actually brought me into his fund to basically learn the art and science of business development and growth, right? And so partnering with him and his early stage portfolio founders to sort of advise their go-to-market strategy, and just sort of learning about what their struggles were and what they cared about and sort of what they had to overcome as far as a relationship with their financing partner. It was a crash course MBA, basically, and some of the, just good luck of being in the right place at the right time. And so from there, I was able to develop a consulting practice that really focused on taking these brands sort of out to market and developing this integrated marketing and sales playbook strategy. And then from there, I really got into talent and recognizing that, a company is only as good as your team, and that teams that had cohesive, balanced chemistry were the ones that were really ahead, because they could adapt and evolve and really overcome any challenges versus, the hyper independent who felt like, there might be something to prove or a desire for a spotlight. And so really I developed sort of a psychographic, firmographic, demographic data playbook, basically, of different types of skill sets and chemistry sets that, really kind of work and don't, right? And so through that process of just basically building teams for my own need from the marketing perspective, to then having clients who had additional needs to expand their company and build out their teams, I just sort of started leveraging both of those experiences, and, really transitioning more into selling SaaS to actually selling people. So it was a pretty natural evolution that requires sort of a foundational build on both assets. So I'm really lucky to have, found myself in this hybrid, because for an early stage company, it's absolutely critical function. And so I'm really lucky to say I love what I do.
That's really cool. And I love the story. I'm just curious, from doing recruiting in tech, when you look at traditional recruiting and what you do, how are they similar and how are they different? And also I should mention, you do something called fractional talent scouting, right? Or fractional recruiting.
Absolutely. So I like to think of fractional services or fractional consulting, if you will, as basically a on-demand service in order to meet the workflow, the highs and lows, the demand, the need of the company in present time, right? And so when you're hiring somebody in staff on, full-time retainer, you're really looking at carrying a lot of risk in doing that. You're really looking at carrying like a compensation package, so pretty heavy payload responsibility, right? And you may have to compromise on the level of expertise because there might be a resource consideration there. So as a fractional consultant, basically I'm able to come in as a very seasoned expert that can advise across, a broader range of skills, and, kind of come in and solve a really tough problem, or, partner to solve a longer term problem over time. And the resources can get turned up or down as is necessary with the different cycle of the business. So it's really de-risking for the executive team and gives everybody an opportunity to kind of date before they get married, right? And it's pretty common as people start to get to know each other, because, when you're building a company, you're building like a kid almost, right? It's a lot of time. It becomes almost like a family, because you're spending all these time with your team members. And so it's a really big commitment and sacrifice in your life. And so, it's got to be thoughtful. It's got to be kind of threaded together is sort of a lot of the trends that I'm seeing more and more lately with the state of the economy, is people are willing to take their time to sort of stitch the right group. And so as a fractional person, it allows me to be able to support that trend. And it also gives me the diversity and the thrill of, learning about a new product, learning about a new space, learning about a new culture and their priorities. So it keeps me on my toes, always in a state of learning. And, then I can kind of help people also more easily because my reach of who I'm connecting with on a regular basis is broader, as opposed to, just kind of focusing on one singular product, brand, or company.
I have so many thoughts. I don't know where to start, but I guess I'll start with team building, because on the podcast, we've definitely talked about team building before. It's a podcast about startups and scaling and building startups. And so, of course, the topic of building the right team comes up often because it's so important for the survival and growth of a startup. And then the second thought was I didn't understand why call it fractional. I looked at your LinkedIn bio and I was like, fractional, I've never seen that. Why, where do they, why would you call anything fractional? You want 100% all the time. Why am I getting a fraction? But, for startups, as you're hiring and you're making these really impactful decisions, hiring is so tricky, right? Sometimes you need to bring in 5 engineers. Sometimes you need to bring in 1 expert in marketing. So for example, and your demand is kind of fluctuating, right? So it makes sense to have, because as an early stage startup, maybe that's not a full-time gig yet. You might have a period of where recruiting is highly in demand, and then periods of drought, so to speak, because that startup is going through fluctuations in growth. So can you speak to that? I guess we already kind of have, but why is embedded recruiting a good fit for particularly early stage startups? And does it work later on?
So I would say that we typically advise, if you are hiring, say, more than 10 roles a month, it makes more fiscal sense to hire in-house. That way you're controlling costs is really what it comes down to, right? And so that we see typically starting around Series B, maybe Series A, depending on the size of the Series A. So oftentimes, right, I'll work on from a pre-seed to a Series A, and supporting anywhere between 1 and 6 hires a month, if you will, right? I would say that's sort of standard engagement per client based on size and revenue and goals and focus, right? And of course, just season, right? And I would say the most popular seasons to recruit are May and September. A secondary season would be February. So those are sort of the main kind of months, I would say, that where the cycle of hiring is really high and really strong. And then the fractional piece for the early stage just is a more comfortable model, right? Where the options, at least in embedded recruiting, are either an hourly with a contingency, a retainer with a contingency, and then, of course, an equity component, right? In order to sort of offset some of that risk and some of that discount, as well as, just offering for a long-term commitment. That's really what I'm looking for, right? Is I'm looking to nurture a lot of these founders into the development of their company, into the development of their product, into the impact into the market. And so that's really where I've seen a lot of my service offerings grow, because, everyone knows that they might need a website or knows they might need a head of engineering, but until the moment where it actually happens, then they have to scramble to figure out a vendor, right? And so where I've been advised over the folks I've been working with over the last couple of months and years is you can be our one-stop shop, right? And my goal is to really take an idea all the way through to revenue. So if somebody comes to me and they just have a thought, the goal is that I can be that 0 to 1 partner through my established network of consultants and experts in all areas of being able to accomplish that initiative. And I'm seeing a lot of trend actually happening where consultants and solopreneurs are building sort of a network of vetted experts in order to support kind of a collaborative approach, which actually allows for a longer runway for bootstrapping, and also just really diversifies the network as well as the skill set and the output. And then, of course, as it's all sort of funneled through one sort of project manager, if you will, in order to be able to just run effectively. Because the goal I'm always thinking about as a founder and entrepreneur myself is, how do I get more time, right? It's really easy to sort of delegate, right? And yet, when you do that, you want to make sure that there's that quality of work performance and account management. And that takes time to cultivate a network like that. And so that's basically what I'm also doing while I'm, supporting my founders as well, is always looking to develop my own talent pipeline for either placements of candidates or just collaborations. And so that's another reason why partnering with embedded recruiting at a very early stage just is, we want to make it a one-stop shop and nice and easy for folks to be able to go all the way around the bases.
100%. I feel like maybe I should have done a little bit more table setting before we kind of got deep into the embedded recruiting. It's fascinating, but I'm just curious. You work with startups after a certain stage. You mentioned mostly Series B, but sometimes Series A. I'm curious, what kind of startups are you doing this for?
Yeah, I would say, deep tech is typically a focus, right? So that looks like really true innovation, right? So there's a hardware innovation, there's a robotics innovation, there's a aerospace innovation, really looking at basically products that require a very technical form of creation, be it rooted in math or physics or some kind of intellectual property, right, that really differentiates the product in the market. There's a lot of companies that are coming out right now that are basically AI wraps, right? It's an idea that's hosted on behalf of another platform, right? That's not going to really be a big differentiator in the marketplace. And frankly, it's just my level of interest, right? And, yet I have worked in some ed tech capacity where I'm seeing there's an opportunity for some major evolution in some industries that are sort of ripe for change. And so that might be in the real estate space or in the financing space or in the insurance space. So I kind of explore different areas that are sort of foundational for transformation. But what always sort of brings my interest back and forward are those really technical, innovative products. I just love hardware. I love manufacturing efficiencies, supply chains, logistics. I really explore a lot of functionalities. There's some companies that I tend to shy away from, which would be more like healthcare, retail, economics, just because they're just a very different and unique beast of expertise, as well as sort of compliance and laws that have their own sort of, need for focus that I think I'm just not as qualified as, a lot of other people who have spent their career looking at those items.
How can embedded recruitment help startups attract top talent in a market that we know is so competitive?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really critical question. The foundation of a really strong program is all about the candidate journey, right? So having that consistency where you are building a full cycle recruitment program that is clear, consistent, concise, that is well communicated both internally and externally, because, your brand in the employee marketplace is only as good as your last conversation, right? And everyone will discuss something negative, but something positive just kind of gets, left in the dust, right? And so it's really important that before building out, any kind of job description or any kind of roadmap for a hiring plan, to look at what are your internal operations, right? And getting clear about your playbook and your scoring system and sort of your ideal candidate profile. And sort of my go-to starting point when I'm working with a new client is pitch me like I'm a VC, right? Help me buy into your company, your vision, your product roadmap, your financing strategies, how you're going to secure, the next 2 years of this person's employment and beyond. Because a lot of times, they're negotiating on equity, which is the possibility 4 years from now that there will be some significant share and cost exchange to that work. So how are we going to sort of position the company where it's an easy yes for the talent, right? And so it's a lot of that is just preparation, right? And just being really communicative. I'm a big fan of not leaving people hanging, right? We know pretty much within 24 to 72 hours whether or not a candidate is going to be progressing.
Yeah. In addition to attracting top talent, Tiffany, can you tell me how embedded recruiting offers other benefits, or are there other benefits to startups' growth when they take on an embedded recruiting strategy?
Absolutely. I think what's really special about an embedded recruiter is just the intimate knowledge of the chemistry and culture. Understanding the values of the individual stakeholders, the responsibilities at play, the projects on the horizon, how those projects sort of fit into the longer term goal, structure, and strategy. That's actually critical when sort of pitching and positioning the opportunity with really top talent. It's very often that top talent is elsewise engaged. So there's not just a positioning of the company, but a negotiation to understand the level of impact and potential or opportunity at play here. I've often found that people who are interested in working in startups are actually a little bit more risk tolerant. And so what they're actually looking for is impact, growth, exposure, visibility, and opportunity to kind of get promoted. And so they are willing to take a little bit of a softer compensation package in order for greater reach, right? And so as an embedded recruiter, I'm going to be able to speak to that with a lot more knowledge, just based on my high touch engagement with the team as sort of an embedded recruiter, and then further advise the hiring manager and the executive staff as to what is the sort of roadmap or hiring plan, right? And so that looks like building a compensation structure, building an equity structure, building an organizational map, and really helping the company to sort of see what is their sort of 2-year resource allocation and management that's going to be required to meet some of those goals that have been set out for the company. And so it gives me a lot more data to work with when taking out to market. Further, a lot of traditional recruiters, they might market the position underneath their own brand, right? And representing their own brand. Whereas an embedded recruiter will go out on behalf of the brand and represent the position and the team at networking events or on different media channels in order to really raise brand awareness and build chatter on the employer marketplace. So you're really getting a very different type of partner. You're getting a marketer, a promoter, an advisor, growth strategist, and then at the core of it, of course, is the recruitment function. And then I think another piece is the offer negotiation piece. I think a lot of traditional recruiters will really go out of their way to squeeze the client for the maximum amount of salary and try to get that, heavy contingency play in order to be able to get their, 25% commission. Whereas an embedded recruiter is really going to look at how do we get the most value, right, for this hire, and oftentimes looking at trying to get a more experienced individual who's interested in a greater reach or greater scope and willing to, take a little bit of a risk and compromise a little bit on the compensation package in exchange for ownership. And so that's a pretty delicate conversation that needs to happen very early on in order to build trust and credibility. And then that level of engagement's got to be maintained, right? And so what I see is a lot of executives, CEOs, founders, they're trying to do 2 full-time jobs, right? Of operating and building and scaling this startup while then also trying to attract some of the best in the industry and the best in the business. And just the level of maintenance required to actually convert that opportunity or at least maintain a very strong positive brand image that really requires full-time attention. And so this is where the education piece and why I'm so excited to be speaking with you guys is I just want to really share that the folks that delegate this responsibility early on and recognize the critical functionality of talent in the company, it leads to 3xing revenue. Just from an operations perspective, from a deliverables perspective, from a reach perspective, from a network development perspective. I mean, imagine if the founding team could double down on hunting capital or double down on meeting those MVP goals and just sort of outsource through a very trusted integrated partner who deeply knows the DNA of the company and the market and the product build, what kind of talent and what could happen on a staffing perspective. And so that's really the magic of an embedded recruiter and some great success that I've seen over the last 10 years.
So we've talked about some of the benefits of embedded recruiting, kind of the ins and outs of what that brings. I'm curious from like the startup's perspective, like what are some key considerations for the startup that's looking to implement an embedded recruiting strategy?
I think, communication style is really critical, right? You've just got to have that sort of fit and, you've got to have that collaborative mindset with the partner that you're taking on. I also think time to hire is an incredible metric, right? I really focus on trying to get somebody in the door and get them started within 6 to 8 weeks of the role going live. I think it's really common actually for roles to be open for anywhere from 3 to 6 months because either they just don't have the prioritization or the bandwidth in order to be able to really convert that. And you'd be surprised how it affects internal morale and also how it affects the desirability in the employee market. And then I would say another consideration, of course, is resource allocation as far as capital strategies, right? And sort of looking at how do we value the contribution of this hire, and are we willing to kind of, take a risk on not hiring the expert to build out the process, because that risk looks like more than just a bad hire or time spent or money lost. There is actually legal risk as well. And so hiring an expert in HR who's focused on talent management and the employee relations piece, as well as just the building of the transparent and legally defensible process, that's a big asset as well in working with an expert. Just in case for any reason there's, accusations of discrimination or, you're wanting to really focus on building a DEI forward company, all of these pieces are considered in the partnership with an embedded recruiter.
How can a startup ensure that when they're hiring an embedded recruiter or bringing them into their team, that they have like a smooth integration of that person?
I think it's leadership and it's humility. It's understanding like what you don't know and just being willing to acknowledge and trust yourself that like you've hired somebody that's, genuinely invested in helping you to know. Right. And so just asking all the questions and, just trusting in the sort of natural scale process. Right. I think also responsiveness, network, and just generally sort of building a collaborative, integrated approach to understanding what the goals, priorities are. That comes just from active listening, right? And I think every relationship is going to be unique and every chemistry is going to be unique. So there's not really a one size fits all, but I would say that there is a very standard playbook of operating best practices that should be pretty clear upon stepping into the conversation. And that looks like templates that can be shared. That looks like networks that can be shared. That looks like events that can be represented. That looks like metrics of performance and retention. Oh my goodness, retention, right? It's not enough to just hire somebody, right? You want to keep them employed. And so that means that you're building a sustainable culture where they're being challenged, where they're seeing growth potential, where where they are feeling like they belong, right? And want to have the impact, want to keep bringing their best positive selves to work. And so building out those like performance management infrastructure, that onboarding structure, even that offboarding structure in case something doesn't work out, right? We're all about risk mitigation here too. And so just sort of looking holistically around, again, from a micro perspective, like taking the recruiting arm from the 0 to 1, like what is the roadmap to that? And can that person that you are interviewing for the opportunity clearly and effectively explain that to you? Because it should be 30 seconds or less.
How can a startup measure the success of an embedded recruiting program that it's putting into place?
There's a couple of factors. I would say, of course, time to hire, that's probably the most critical. So the moment a job description is public to having somebody start. Another metric to look at would be, again, retention. The goal in tech is to have an employee retained for a minimum of 2 years. Which is in itself its own accomplishment. And I like to educate founders that if you can keep an employee in tech from year 2 to year 3, so one additional than the average, you've just paid for all of your recruiting services, all of your recruiting consulting, all of the resources that go into recruiting, if you're able to keep that team member from year 2 to year 3. So I think that that's a really important fact for a lot of founders. The other piece is advisory services, right? So what tech stack is going to be most effective to support scale? And so just kind of rattling off what I like, what I don't like, some budget-friendly options, some early growth term options. All that just kind of comes with expertise, right? And then a super basic one, but what was the company like when you started and where was it at when you left? So revenue, team size, retention size, how many cross-functional positions did you fill, right? So if you maybe built out a bunch of executive members or head of members, how many support folks did you bring on to each one of those teams, right? And then, just generally like tracking the growth and the different stages of the company to see sort of how you contributed and what your impact was around filling positions and creating more.
What about potential challenges that startups might face with embedded recruitment? And then how can those challenges be overcome?
I would say some of the highest risk challenges is actually focus, prioritization, and time, right? So in order for an embedded recruiter to be effective, at least especially in the first 3 to 4 weeks, there needs to be a lot of face time with internal staff, right? It's massive research and discovery time, right? It's looking under the hood, meeting the stakeholders, understanding their values, understanding their priorities and responsibilities, figuring out what their knowledge base is of interviewing, because you'd be surprised how many people have never done it, right? So there might be an opportunity for training staff members, which is a big value of an embedded recruiter as well, is coming in and sort of building an LMS system, right? Learning management system where folks can kind of self-educate as you grow and scale, or you can kind of have that one-to-one training session. This looks like building out custom interviews and scoring and teaching the value of note-taking, having sort of that team mom mentality where it's like, okay, we're going to get everybody in a room and we're going to collaborate and get to the bottom of why this score was this way, and, sort of understand the weight in the room and give everybody an opportunity to participate in the decision. I find that that's really critical in very early hires. It's giving people a lot of access and impact into making the decisions. And then as natural scale happens, right, I would say around 50 employees is when you start to see a lot of individualization happen, where people go from what's best to the company to what's best for me. And so as an embedded recruiter, my my client is always going to be the company first, right? And so thinking about what is in the best interest of the company and the growth model and the projections and the revenue, and sort of continuing to bring the focus back to that holistic mindset. And so having that cross-functional expertise and visibility will really allow me to address any roadblocks or limiting beliefs or bottlenecks and function as a coach, if you will, in order to be able to continue to keep that communication open and to keep those plans aligned and to ultimately get those successful top talent hires in the door. So it's a pretty rare gift to offer. And I think a lot of founders could definitely take more advantage of it, considering the level of data that's being collected in the relationship.
This all sounds like it has a lot of potential, and I just want to hear like a real world example from you. Like, can you share a success story of a partnership that helped a startup?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to think about one of my favorites, and I'll talk about Butler. Butler is a IoT product founding team out of MIT. They basically built a video system in order to be able to track and monitor environments. And it's anonymous, so it's HIPAA compliant. And they reached out to Embedded Recruiting to develop their engineering staff and bring in some, technicians and field engineers and a head of people and sort of scale into their operational perspective. And so we started with them when they were pre-seed, moving into Series A, and it was just a fantastic product, first and foremost, with just a brilliant, absolutely industry-leading idea. The team was about, 17 people when we were contracted to support globally. And, they were just looking for honest, pretty technical sales, engineering, and people support in order to really grow their revenue and pipeline. And so, we came in and built the recruiting system soup to nuts, got those phenomenal hires in the door for them, all of which I think were about 6 or 7 hires in less than 3 to 4 months, and just really supported the team in scaling in order to be able to land that Series A, and worked with some phenomenal team members there across different disciplines to really understand what their values are, how they want to feel on the day-to-day, and then of course just supporting the process all the way through to getting those folks on the board. And it was just a very satisfying experience, and I'm happy to see that team really thriving.
Okay, last question here. What advice would you give to founders who are considering embedded recruitment for their startup?
Take the leap of faith. It's really easy to think that you can do it all. It's really easy to deprioritize talent in favor of revenue and product development. But if you can even begin to develop a network of advisors and mentors and interested parties and start having the conversations in the marketplace about what you're building and who you're building it with, you'll see so many doors open that way. Oftentimes, it's really easy to get financing if you're a repeat exit success, right? And so that's knowledge and information sharing. And that's a huge differentiator in a lot of success. Yes, you've got to have the grit. Yes, you've got to have the stamina. Yes, you've got to have the executive functioning skills. But ultimately, people are the ones who write checks. And when bringing in, a talent strategist, it's really buying into a network, buying into a very tested and thorough playbook from soup to nuts, and really taking the company and the opportunity for success to a higher level of percentage and operating power. And so don't try to do it all. Do what you know and do what you do best, and then be wise to delegate and give it to somebody who can equally perform in their area of expertise.
All right. Well, I love that answer. Take the leap of faith. I feel like that's good advice for startup founders and just people in general as they go through their day-to-day. So let's wrap this up. Before we do, how can listeners learn more about embedded recruiting and potentially explore what you're offering?
Please visit our website, embeddedrecruiting.co. We also have a great list of services as well as recommendations in history on our LinkedIn page. Happy to take 30 minutes and offer sort of a complimentary conversation or advisory discussion on the current state of the company, what your goals might be, some potential for us to collaborate and support, and we can go from there.
Awesome. All right. That's where we're going to end it. If you liked our show, please subscribe wherever you source pods and leave us a 10 out of 10 5-star rating. To learn more about us, visit angelneers.com. Thanks to our chief angelneer for production and editing. And Tiffany, thanks for joining us today and the fruitful conversation.
Absolutely, Oleg. Thank you so much for the time. It's been an absolute pleasure and looking forward to continuing to support your community.
Awesome. Thank you so much.